Today we're going to introduce object-oriented programming classes into PHP programming. You may have been exposed to this in other programming classes. I hope so, because it's one of those concepts that you really need to see over and over again before you finally understand it. But in this case, just a couple definitions off the web. A class begins with a keyword class, followed by a pair of curly braces, and so on. That's all the syntax of it. But what really is it? Well, a class can contain some constants, some variables, otherwise known as properties, and some functions, otherwise known as methods. Now, I remember way back when I was first introduced to classes, and one of the classic examples was simply a dog as a class. And there you can have an object that is an instance of a class. And there are things that they have properties like color, eye color, hair color, height, length, weight, and methods like sit, lay down, shake, come, that kind of stuff, or go away. That could potentially be a dog's method as well. And, to update it to the modern world, we have classes like boys and girls, and of that there are various objects, and those objects have properties. You may have noticed that. And properties have values. So things like your name is a property and has a value. Another example might be students. You have an F name, an L name, a date of birth, and various grades, midterms and projects and final exams. And the methods that I would take on those would be to print your midterm grade, or to calculate your final grade, or to determine your summer school status. Those are things that happen to those objects. And all that data is carried collectively, not individually. I sometimes liken it to the Batman utility belt, where it's all in there, whatever we need. Now, we're going to call this particular object SiteUser, this class SiteUser, and I open and close it a curly brace. All of that is, of course, inside the PHP question mark. Now I'm going to set up some variables, and so these are the properties of this particular class object. Variable uname, so that's the username. It's going to be an email format. I'm just making some notes. The P word will be encrypted. I had to debate that. Would it be unencrypted or encrypted? But I finally settled on encrypted. First names and last names with F name and L name, role. You'll notice each of those had a comma after them except for the last one, role, which has a semicolon. Now, you can make a construct, but I'm calling this particular function SiteUser, which is the same name as it, which makes it the construct. And in there, right now, I have nothing in my parentheses, just open and close curly braces as well, but I'll get to that. Because what I'm going to put inside the parentheses is the username, the password, the first name, last name, and role. Those 5 things, potentially anyway. We'll more on that later. So the syntax is this, $this, which refers to SiteUser object, minus sign greater than symbol uname equals $u, and P word and F name and so on. Each of those, we're just assigning it to whatever value was sent in those parentheses. And I'm just assigning those 5. So that's the constructor that will create this class. It automatically executes. If you send me those 5 pieces of information, it will automatically create this object and assign these values to those properties. However, what if you don't tell me that information? You don't specify it. Well, I've got them in order here, but $u equals unknown, $pw equals question mark, first, last, and guessed. That's what's going to appear. If I do not specify, let's say, a $F, it'll just come up with the word first. If I don't specify $L, it'll just assign it last, and R will become guessed. Now, there are other methods, otherwise known as functions, but methods that you can use in this object, like full name. What is that? Well, my first name is Frank, my last name is Yunker, so I would say my full name is Frank space Yunker. And so what I'm going to do is have $full equals this F name. The dot, of course, means concatenate, and put a space, and then concatenate again, whatever the last name is, and a return of $full. So it's just going to calculate that and then return it. I could have, of course, done that in one step. Here's an alphabetical method that just returns this last name, and then in quotes, comma, space, and then the first name. So if I wanted to be Yunker, comma, Frank, then that's what this would would give me that kind of information. Now, back in our functions.php, we've got to get things organized here. One of the things we need is a getID function. You give me the username and the password, and I'm going to get the ID, because I need to know your ID sometimes. So begin with assuming $ID is NA, not applicable or not available. And then let's get an SQL statement going here. $SQL equals select ID from site users, where username is whatever I supplied as the username, and password or pword is whatever I supplied as the $PW. And I execute that and get myself a result set. $result equals my SQL query of $SQL. Now, if in fact there is a row, okay, because there may not be, it could be an empty set. If it's an empty set, then ID stays NA. However, if there is a row, then it says ID is reassigned the value of $row of ID. So I'm getting that ID, and of course, what am I going to do with that? Return it. So I either return the ID value or I return the phrase NA. In the lookup user info, the reason I needed the ID field is because I needed to know the ID that I'm looking up and the field. Sometimes I want to get some extra data out of people, like their first name, their last name, or maybe their role, and kind of update that. So I start with $info equals NA, same logic as before, and my SQL statement is select $field. So whatever you sent as the second parameter becomes what's going to be returned from site users, where ID equals whatever you sent as the first parameter. And I get my result set. And if in fact there is a result set, it says $info equals $row bracket $field close bracket. So it's saying, okay, whatever field name you gave me, F name, L name, role, whatever it was, it's going to return that value. And that's what I returned. So that being said, I'm now going to include the SiteUser.php page within my SiteLogin.php page. And what I'm doing here is where I had checked to see if it was a valid user. Assuming it is a valid user, I just said $member equals new site user. And notice all I did is put post username and MD of the post P-word. So I had mentioned that I could have sent up to 5 parameters. I actually only sent 2. So you know what it thinks my first name is? First. And my last name? Last. And so when I say welcome, I added here $member full name. Now, full name has parentheses after it, because remember, that's a method or a function. So $member -sign greater than symbol full name parentheses. And when I do that, well, first I got to log in, and I put my username and password, and it says welcome first last. So that's exactly what I thought was going to happen, because I have first and last listed. If you don't specify, that's what it becomes. Maybe I do want to specify though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that page, and I'm going to add 3 lookups. Member FName lookup, user info of ID, and there it is FName, or second one is LName, third one is role. So it's going to change the values of member FName, LName, and role by looking up that data. And all I got to do is resubmit here on my web page, and what happens? It says welcome Frank Yunker now. So those 3, since I'm going to kind of do those all the time, I'm going to take those 3, cut them out of there, and replace them with a function called update member. Notice I'm sending the member object and the ID. And all I'm doing there is running those same 3 commands, but within the update member. That way it just looks a little cleaner.